This is episode 105 of our road to Unicum, and today we review the Progetto 65. This is the tier 10 Italian medium tank in that line. So I really enjoyed the tier 9 standard B, and the Progetto 65 has some improvements in several areas. One, you get a fourth shell in the clip instead of the 3 in the standard B. The intra-clip reload is a bit shorter, down from 3 seconds to 2.5, and that means you can pump out with a fully loaded clip 1440 damage in 7.5 seconds, which is really good compact burst. Now the main issue is the reload times are really long when your clip is empty, so you have to be careful and disciplined about those times when you're going to be firing 2, 3, or even 4 shells. And that 121 was trying to push up the hill. Now I would push up the hill, consider it, if I were in a brawling medium tank. So the 121 and the 430U both have much better armor profiles than my tank does. It is worth noting that the upper hull of the Progetto 65 is incredibly angled, so you will bounce shells. However, the turret cheeks offer only about 160 millimeters of effective armor, and so for all intents and purposes, you have to consider that any tier 9 or 10 tank that you're going to face is going to have an easy time penetrating you through your turret, and the turret is the one thing you have to expose every time you're going to fire. Now, our 430U has pushed up a bit aggressively here, and then you can see their tanks also have already advanced down the 2 lane. I'm able to put a shot into the side of the turret there for the Wheezy. And again, with a lot of maps, there is that east-west crossfire dynamic, even though the lanes are pointed north-south. That's true of the 1-2 lanes and also of the 8 lane along the river. Okay, so able to put 2 shells into that Leopard, so he's now one-shotable. And right now I'm debating what to do. Right, I could try to push up and save the 430U. My expectation was, given that he's getting dogpiled by 3 tanks, with one of them being an autoloader, that he was dead. And then belatedly I decided to go up and try to support him. It turns out our 121 comes flying down from the Abbey, smashes the Leopard, and at this point their remaining tanks are in a pretty bad state. By this point, you can assume that the Batchat 25T hasn't loaded his clip, so he's going to run away. So I focus down the high DPM 140 first, and then finish off the Batchat, who's the least threat at that point in time. Now, we could have saved the 430U. It's like one of those things when you're in a random battle like this, and especially if you're not in a platoon, it's hard to say what support you're going to get from your friendlies. Like if I had known that the 121 was going to come down for sure, I'd have pushed up about 10 seconds earlier. We may have been able to save the 430U. But as it is, I'm trying to, especially if the 430U had died relatively quickly, which is what I would have expected, and I had pushed around, I would have been able to dump 4 shells off, but with 1440 damage, that may not have been enough to clean them up, and then, then I'm facing really long reloads. Notice I've managed to load 3 of the 4 shells. It's taken, the Batchat died a while ago. I'm now fully loaded. Now, ideally, I'd like to find they're already and pick them off, and I have to choose a flank to try to support, right? You can either go to the 1-2 lane and help out there, or I can go to the 8 lane and try to spring them there. And so I was coming over here to see if I could find Artie, and notice he's not aiming at me. So I can take all my sweet time, get fully aimed in, and finish him off. And notice the Striv 103B was starting to move north on the 2 lane, right? And the tank that was on the 2 lane, our friendly tank, died. And so part of the challenge is, or problem is, if I went to the 2 lane to try to quote unquote flank their tanks, you can see their E4 has also been spotted and moving north. What really would happen is I'd end up I'd be in a 1v2 or potentially 1v3. The second I get lit there, notice I start to kind of swerve a little bit. It wasn't enough to get out of the initial hit there from the Striv 103, but at least I'm able to dive down into the dish here. And the profile of this tank is relatively low, so when you're in a ditch like this, I'm not exposing my tank. And I don't have a shot on the Striv 103B, and their Super Conqueror, which is at full health, has also pushed north in the 2 lane. So I was coming over here to try to help our guys spring them out of the 8 lane. It turns out they were able to finish off that 430U on their own. And so I made the right call not trying to push down the 2 lane, because the Super Conqueror would have just obliterated me. Right? That's a tank which, from a frontal perspective, his turret's incredibly strong. I can pen him through his lower plate, but not a lot of good shots. And right there, I only had a very small shot available. That would be hitting him on the right side of his tank where the armor is paper thin, but that was a very small sliver. And so you guys have heard me talk about position before damage, right? In that case, I broke my own rule, stopped, in the middle of open ground with my side fully exposed, tried to take a low percentage shot, which of course missed, and ate a shot in return. The problem now is I'm either two-shottable or one-shottable. Now the reason why I'm coming up to Abbey, this is why a hill position in the middle of the map is really valuable in late game. Now my expectation is some of their tanks will probably push south, right? Although, as it turns out, most of their tanks do the correct thing, which is to go back to their base to defend. Defending is almost always more valuable than trying to cap. If you don't defend, you'll get capped out. If you defend, most likely those tanks that are trying to cap will be fairly isolated, right? So if they go and they try to push the tanks to the north, our guerrilla isn't in a position to do anything. Now, I initially thought our guerrilla is going to go counterclockwise and push up the 1-2 lane. I thought he was crazy for doing this, because if it turns out that their mouse or other tanks had pushed south, they would just wreck the guerrilla. But as it turns out, you can see both Super Conquerors had flexed toward the north side of the map, and so they're going back for a reset play. So you can see our guys, even though they got really close to capping, aren't able to finish it off. And so I actually came down from Abbey because I want to have a wider field of fire. If you're up in the Abbey and you're trying to fire northwest, there's a smaller window open, whereas here I have a better wider field of fire, right? Especially along the 4 lane if I was trying to get to any of their tanks that try to push across. Okay, took 3 shots there, managed to get 2 kills. That first snapshot on the E100 didn't penetrate, and then this shot, I'm not sure where it went, but I thought I had a pretty good chance at a kill shot. But at this point, we're in the driver's seat. Our guerrilla is going to push up on the Striv. Because the Striv is most likely looking towards their cap, facing east, the guerrilla should have the first shot advantage. And then at that point, the guerrilla and Striv may stalemate each other, right? Because the Striv really isn't built for brawling around corners. The guerrilla, for that matter, really isn't either, because of the way that I think the turret only has a limited firing arc, although it is turreted, so that is an advantage around the rocks. But anyway, it's really just going to boil down to the mouse and the versus the E4, me, and the Artie. So the mouse is technically facing 3 opponents, right? Because we should assume that our GW E100, if he were smart, would be firing on the mouse. I guess it would be a valid shot for him to fire on the Striv too, but okay, he looks like he's now going to choose to fire on the Striv. Of course, if he hits the Striv, he's going to end up stunning our guerrilla. But I've got a fully loaded clip. The main thing here is, if you're wondering why I didn't come down from Abbey, it's because I have vision control up here, right? And I was actually expecting, if the mouse took his time, he should be able to penetrate the E4 either through the cupola, or, as his tank's retreating, potentially through the thin sides or the lower glacis. Now, the silver APCR penetration is 268, which is pretty solid, but the mouse is has very thick armor and was angled, and he kept quite not angling perpendicular to me. Obviously, if I had heat in my loadout, I could simply shift and try to. By the way, when you shift ammo types, it kind of reloads your entire clip, right? But managed to get that flanking shot and got a lot of kills, primarily because I went to the middle of the map, and then from there I was able to get late 4 kills from the Abbey. That's why that's so powerful. So let's take a look at this Himmelsdorf battle. This is encounter mode. Whenever I platoon people and like, oh, I don't play encounter mode, I just tell them just ignore the cap. Pretend that it's not there. Play for map control, because that's what matters. And in encounter mode, it takes over 4 minutes for an individual to solo cap. So I think you only get 1 cap point for every 2.5 seconds, which is super slow. And especially on a small map like this, where the cap is largely exposed, it's really easy to reset the cap if needed. Now, as it turns out, our team is, pushing up towards hill. Our E4 that's directly in front of me is in the best position here to snipe from, because he's largely hull down. So, he and I both can't occupy the same space. The north spawn, in my opinion, has a bit of a harder time getting up to hill, because you have to go over the top here and then cross diagonally in front of fire, whereas on their side, their tanks can dip over to the 9 lane and then cut back to 0. So the other side is a better approach, in my opinion. And I don't really have that good of shots right now, but I'm trying to be patient. And the main thing is, like, if there's so many tanks around hill, I can't just go up around brawl unless one of their tanks overextends. There's really not that I can do, because you don't want to go around a corner into the fire of like 2, 3, or even 4 enemy tanks, because then at that point, even if I manage to get off all 4 shells, I'm going to likely eat 4 shells in return. You never want to trade. Now, the big mistake that we've made in our deployment is nobody went into Tank Alley, so that's the 7 and 8 lane. So their Conqueror is already pretty deep. And then our Gisor, the British light tank, I don't know what he's doing, but he's just kind of sitting stationary in an exposed area. He got picked off. And now it's just the Skoda. I mean, thankfully, a couple of our mediums also come downhill. So it looks like we've got the Object 430 and the T-54. Now, what I don't want to do is engage in a fight with the Conqueror and let him operate hull down. And so I make a bad call here. Now, if I had stayed hidden, I got lit, but if I'd stayed hidden and their Conqueror pushed up so that he's in between these piles of dirt where I can unload 4 shells on him before he can get back behind cover, that would be a worthwhile thing to do. But he's playing this smart. He's not pushing up. And then, part of the issue is we don't know if there are other tanks also behind the Conqueror who just simply haven't been spotted yet. And so I really can't stay here. There's not much I'm going to be able to do here. This isn't, fighting from a position of strength. The main issue with what I'm about to do, because I've been spotted and I'm still lit, when I cross over here, I give that Conqueror a flanking shot. And then, unfortunately, our T-54 and Object 430 have opted not to engage him. So I just gave away a chunk of my hit points for nothing. And, now I'm flexing over to the west side of the map to see if there's anything I can do about either the 1390 or the Skoda T-50, or potentially spot another tank. Keep in mind, our Skoda right now is at full HP. And notice their tortoise when I lit him. He did not move, right? He didn't notice me on the minimap. There's a little bit of a delay before 6th Sense. So I'm able to take my time with that first shot and aim in. And then, in between, he snapshotted when he saw me. A lot of people will do this. Generally speaking, snapshotting against a one single shot tank isn't as much of a risk. But if you do it against an autoloader or auto-reloader, like, I love baiting people into bad shots. So that tortoise, after he snapshotted me his first shot, I just went ahead and aimed at his cupola. Okay, so it looks like our Skoda has lost the majority of his hit points, and he's really in a very exposed, too far forward position. He should get out of there, right? I got a little bit lucky there. That car, I was sitting behind it, and that ate one of the shells. It's one of those things, you got to be aware of where some of the destructible cover is. Right, we're down 4 tanks. Hill's still not resolved. It's unclear whether we're going to win Hill or not. Part of the problem is they could potentially have guys firing from the G lane all the way up onto Hill. Right, so I don't want to get into the 7 lane. I don't want to face both the Centurion 7-1 and the Conqueror, because that means there'll be 2 guns firing against my 1. So what I want to do ideally is get around to the side where they're not expecting me. I find the 7-1. Notice he immediately starts to turn, so he was paying attention to his minimap the second that he was spotted. Watch the countdown here. I'm almost loaded on my 4th shell, and I fire. So I'm not sure if I got that one loaded yet, but I fired because he was exposing his thin side armor. And then I do something which I would do a lot, I just expose the side of my tank, the Centurion 7-1, kind of panic shots. He shouldn't have done that unless he had a clear shot against me. So I'm able to put the Centurion down. What I was going to do is side scrape, and this tank does not have good side hull armor, but it's mostly just to bait a shot into my track since I had the repair kit up. Okay, but now I need to get out of here. So Skoda and T-54 are dead. There are a massive tanks now around the 5, 6, 7 lanes, and our 430U has 1 sliver of health. He really wasn't reading the map. He stayed in there too long, and then he really has nowhere to go. Now, if I were him, I'd go clockwise around the map. I would go up the 6 and then down the A lane, but he waited too long. And then here, remember I talked about earlier, position before damage? I'm actually in a relatively good position. Most of my tank was behind this pile of rubble. There was a little bit of, my turret peeking out, on the very rear side of my tank, but relative to that Skoda, I was in a far better position. The main problem is I keep, emptying my clip, which means I have to wait for a very long time for the reload. And part of what you notice, I'm not just flat out running up the 0 lane. If I do that, the Skodas are going to come up, they're going to clip me out before I can get to the top of the hill. So, they don't necessarily know how many shells I have in my clip. I'm holding this corner here and using this rubble just to delay them. And obviously, I can proxy spot their Conqueror coming around the corner. That was a big shot on their Skoda. And then that Conqueror, I intentionally went for a tracking shot. Now, I've been noticing this a lot. It's great to take tracking shots when your opponent is angled, 30, 40 degrees relevant to you, so they're diagonal. And so there's a good chance that you'll both track them and damage them. In the case of the Conqueror, when I fired when he was perpendicular to me, if that shot misses, then even if I track him, I may not do any damage at all. And so, in that case, if I had to do it over again, I would have aimed further to the left to make sure my reticle was in the hull. And if I track him, great, but regardless, I deal damage because I'm at risk of dying, and so I might as well work in as much damage as I can because it wouldn't have increased my risk. Thankfully, these two heavies came down the hill. This is what saved this match because we had lost control of the middle and western sides of the map, and really, my biggest contribution in this match, well, I'd say the most significant thing that I did was dragging this out and just buying our team time. And I'm kind of getting in the way of these heavies. I shouldn't stay up here. Moreover, our 430U is one-shotable. So I don't know what the situation is with the 1390, but in terms of how much 1390 has in this clip. But I want to go up here and help the 430U in case the 1390 has them dead to rights. And you can tell when the 1390 is running, that means he's basically given up. Maybe he's out of shells, etc. Now their Tortoise, he's a brawling tank destroyer. Right, and I know some people will play these as snipers in the end, but you have to at some point be willing to push up. You can't bother solo capping on a map like this. It takes over 4 minutes. That's a joke, right? Especially with the speed of tanks at tier 10. And, he ended up dealing one shot of damage and being largely like an AFK bot. Largely irrelevant because he didn't put himself in a worthwhile position to support his friendlies. If he had pushed up the B lane even slowly, they would have won this match for sure. And a big shout out to both that 277, that 60 TP, who had the awareness on the minimap when I asked for help to come down and bail out our B line. Okay, I am working on the 430U, and so I'm going to be reviewing some of the Russian mediums. You guys have requested it, so that's something to look forward to. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Take care.